Hi there. I had the pleasure of having Anna Hermansen here with me. How are you doing, Anna?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
Pretty good. Thank you for taking time of your Tuesday night in Vancouver for us to speak a little bit about your career. So greatly appreciated. And Anna, can you introduce yourself? What do you do today? What's your role?
Yeah, so I work at the Linux Foundation. I've been with the foundation for 3 years, and my current role is ecosystem manager, which is a kind of a project management role with the Linux Foundation on our research team. And then my kind of second job is a senior researcher of the Linux Foundation. So I kind of straddle two different roles in the foundation.
That's fantastic. Anna, you have a background in international relations, right?
Mhm.
I'm just wondering, how did your interest in technology come up to be, considering your background in international relations?
Yeah, it's so I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do when I went through my undergrad at UBC here in Vancouver, and I started in as you mentioned, a kind of more political science, international relations area, but I was curious in a lot of different domains and started to do some electives in sociology, linguistics, and then I also did some computer science courses, and I got to a point where I thought I may want to minor in it, and then it kind of took over my life academically, and I wasn't focusing on my major, which was I had declared as international relations. So I stepped a bit back from that, but I found I think what made it difficult to balance with my other work, but what I really loved about it was just the total fixation that you have when you're coding and building a project. And sometimes you want to smash your computer, but I loved doing it. I really enjoyed learning. I learned Java, and it felt very much like an accomplishment. And so it kind of piqued my interest. And then I turned back, as I mentioned, to international relations and focused in on that. But I would say from that point on, and even younger than that, I've been interested in technology and kind of how systems work. But I think after going through my undergrad and looking at things from that international relations perspective, I became very interested in a larger picture, kind of more strategic look at how these systems work, and in particular how technology has political, economic, and social realms. And so I from my undergrad, I went on to do some work. I moved to Toronto and I did some work in Toronto, and I got exposed to the tech sector in Toronto through a few different jobs, and just really realized that was where my interests lie, was in that intersection of how technology can support, social problems, political complications, economic things that are going on. So that was really where I first got interested in the tech sector.
Very interesting. I specifically like your description that sometimes you feel the urge of smashing the computer. That makes total sense. So
Yeah.
it does look like you had some exposure to technology for sure.
Mhm.
So especially programming.
Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit more about because university and then you took a master's degree, and what led you to choose the master degree program, and how was that experience for you?
Yeah, so I finished my undergrad, as I mentioned, and then I moved to Toronto, and I
Hmm.
had a bunch of different jobs. I was a dog walker at one point. I built a website for a charity. I was kind of, as I mentioned earlier, I was really trying to figure out what interested me because my undergrad didn't really compel me towards a certain job. So I landed at a web development boot camp where I wasn't in a technical role, but I interacted a lot with individuals who were learning how to be software developers. And then within that job, within that program, that web development program, we started a course on blockchain, and I thought, what is this? I need to know more about this. And they let us sit in on some of the courses, and I just became really fascinated by it. I can't really describe it. I just wanted to know more, and not so much from the crypto side, although I wanted to understand how it worked technologically, but more kind of how these systems can help us better manage and track data and trust and transactions. And so I got quite interested in that. I listened to podcasts. I tried to teach myself as much as I could. And then I landed a different job for a research development, a research institute that studied blockchain at an enterprise level. And then started becoming quite interested in how blockchain is used in different sectors, in particular in healthcare. So this is kind of a longer answer how I got to my master's, but I did do 3 years between my undergrad and my master's. And so within that 3 years of exploring, yeah, as I mentioned, I became quite interested in how we can use blockchain in healthcare and how to better track and manage data, given we have such intractable data issues in healthcare. So at that point, I knew I wanted to go back to school. I was ready for it. And I've applied to, I think, 6 or 7 different schools. For all of them, I applied to iSchools. I thought I wanted to come at it from understanding how information systems work and then applying healthcare on that in a thesis or something. And then UBC was the one school that I found someone who was actually working directly in public health and blockchain and data systems. And he was affiliated with the School of Population and Public Health. So reached out to him, wrote him an email, and we kind of became a really great intellectual match. And that's kind of how I got to what my master's degree was, which was a Master's of Science in Public Health.
So you were in BC, then you went to Toronto, and then you came back to BC for the master's degree.
I did. I wasn't quite ready. I loved Toronto, but it was a really good move for me intellectually, and my family's here, and I now love Vancouver more than Toronto, I promise. So
That's okay. So can you tell us a little bit more about healthcare and blockchain, and what kind of problems do you think that the blockchain can solve? You mentioned data and the amount of data and everything else. What kind of problems do you see the blockchain can help in healthcare in general?
Yeah, so there's a few things I can think of from when I was working at the Research Institute. One of them was a case study at the UHN, at the University Health Network in Toronto, and they were running a pilot on how to better track where data is being sent between these different systems of UHN, because UHN has, I don't know how many groups are affiliated with it, but there are a few different university affiliated hospitals and clinics through that. And so we were working with some folks, I think at IBM, that might not be right. I can't remember who they were. It was a long time ago, but they were looking at how we can better trust where data is going, who's accessing it, how it's being used, whether or not it's being tampered, and how secure it is. And so that was that was one use case that we were looking at. And then I went on a trip to Tennessee with my boss at the time, and we met up with an individual who was working on a project called Remedy Chain, which was tracking different. So in the pharmaceutical system, particularly in expensive drugs such as cancer drugs, there are individuals who, for example, pass away and they have these drugs in their home, and the only real thing you can do with the guidance that we have from the FDA is to throw them out, and to throw them out in a safe way. But he was looking at how can we redirect this medical waste, so to speak, to people who can't afford the drugs and who need them. And so he was tracking, I can't quite remember the numbers, but he was tracking a significant amount of waste in drugs. And so he started working with a Hyperledger Besu on the kind of Hyperledger and Ethereum hybrid client, and building out a solution to track whether or not the drug has been tampered with, who it gets to, who's using it, why, and understand this system of waste, even just to have data points behind how much is being waste and then diverted, and the sustainability in that. So I think I found it more just, there's so many different use cases in healthcare where we don't have the trust there. We need the trust, and being able to build out solutions that someone can go in and access data in a secure way really takes out the major privacy concerns that come with healthcare.
That's fantastic. So it'll be interesting to hear more about this topic as well. There's so many different applications and such an interesting problem to deal with in solving that, reducing the waste, right? So and benefiting others is also a fantastic initiative. And Anna, you work for the Linux Foundation, right? So we talk about Linux and we talk about open source. And did your university experience somehow shift your view of the open source community different than someone coming from a pure computer science background?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the foundation, actually, we don't hire a lot of pure software programmers. They may have a history of that, but their role isn't in development. Our executive director, Jim Zemlin, calls us the janitors of the open source community, which doesn't sound like a very attractive or promising role, but as he describes it, we make sure this community is clean and safe and sustainable and, is not necessarily a janitor role, but there's kind of legal structure around what we're doing and what these projects are doing and bringing that kind of nucleus of gravity. And so I found I meet a lot of software developers, but I find my skill set more in looking bigger picture, looking strategically at how our communities are collaborating, why they're collaborating, what are the economic incentives to do so, what are the geopolitical tensions that might be harming collaboration, or maybe in some cases benefiting collaboration or benefiting open source. And so I think that every time I read news about open source, or our executive director, Jim Zemlin, sends out a newsletter, and there's content in there that I myself feel like that harkens back to what I know about, different, as I mentioned, the kind of economic systems, geopolitical tensions. And so I could kind of bring that larger picture and that larger almost meta-analysis to our community and why someone might be contributing to an open source project beyond the kind of technical benefits, but the kind of structures around how our society functions. And I mean, it's taken me a long time to learn and understand the business case for open source and how our foundation actually works. But it helps that I have those kind of foundational pieces there to understand what are these structures around collaboration, around innovation, around kind of our economy and what our incentives are in that sense. So yeah, I would say having that international relations background, even though it was many years ago now, it really helps me in even just understanding how the foundation works.
So your role is ecosystem manager right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
What does it entail, and what kind of a challenge do you deal with in your day-to-day?
Yeah, so as I mentioned at the top of the call, it's sometimes I relate it to being a program manager or project manager. But my boss and I liked the ecosystem component of it because there is a lot of stakeholder engagement in our research portfolio. So my boss, Hillary Carter, she founded the research program at the Linux Foundation back in 2021. And since then, we've published, I think we're almost at 100 research reports. And each one of our research reports has some sort of stakeholder engagement involved, whether that's the person that's commissioned the research or, we have survey respondents, we have interviewees. And so my role within each of our projects is really to make sure we're on top of what, for example, what we've promised someone who's commissioned research, maybe what sort of branding guidelines we need to follow, how to work with our internal teams, our marketing team, our demand generation team, our web team. And so there's a lot of different relationship management in my role. And then on top of that, I also kind of call it passing the hot potato. So getting our asset, which is our research, from the very first stage of brainstorming through to, primary research, data analysis, manuscript writing, over to our creative team for production, and then online with our web team, and then the marketing and promotion that happens after the fact. So it's kind of a life cycle look at our research and understanding where we can, best achieve our results and our stakeholder engagement.
And how do you balance the management side of things with the hands-on research kind of work that you do?
Yeah, it's not difficult, but they take very different skill sets. So the ecosystem management role is, understanding the larger picture, as I mentioned, that kind of life cycle of the research project, keeping a lot of things in my brain, a lot of details. Anyone who's been in a project management role knows what I'm talking about, but juggling all the different priorities and responsibilities that go into each of our research projects. We could be running 4 at a time. We could be running 7 at a time. We have some periods of time where we're very busy, and each of them could be in different stages. So there's that kind of prioritization, time management, stakeholder relationship skills that I've really honed from this role, and have been able to, I think, well support our clients as our partners as we go through the research process. And then my other side of my desk is the more research side, and that's, I would say, where my true love is and my true skill set lies. Is I actually love sitting down at my computer and working on something for 8 hours and not being bothered by Slack and email as maybe most people do, but I actually love that hyper focus on one thing, which I think was why I liked computer science, computer programming as much as I did in my 3rd year. And so the research angle really lends itself to that. But I would say actually balancing those two can be a bit difficult. Sometimes I just have a day where I'm doing research. I turn off my Slack. I turn off I'm available, but I kind of turn off the distractions and do the research I need to do and do the focusing I need to do. But it is also actually nice sometimes to have I'm not just, and maybe anyone who's a programmer knows, it's nice to have a bit of a break and some kind of more management and even administrative, a bit more monotonous things to do to kind of break up that that hyperfixation on one project or one thing.
Yeah, I can see things in both ways, right? So there's the space that you need when you need to have a hyper focus on something. But there's also the time when you're so focused that you can't find a solution for the problem. You need to go do something else or have a little bit of a break. So it's kind of interesting to see that happening as well.
Yeah.
So one thing that it's inevitable that everybody's talking about AI, and we actually met through a presentation that you did on that space at the local Vancouver Linux group, right? And you did some work recently on sovereignty AI and the need for digital sovereignty in Europe. And why do you think open source is the critical missing piece for nations trying to build their own AI infrastructure?
So I think it's a huge part of it, a huge piece of our national infrastructure for a few reasons. The research report you mentioned, the Sovereign AI report, we ran a survey and we also ran 3 different webinars. And so the survey was meant to be more kind of general population-wide opinions and preferences on this topic. And then this webinar is more kind of nuanced, expert-led conversations. So it was really interesting to see those 2 pieces come together, which is what I love about mixed methods research, is kind of having these different methods validate and complicate answers. But the survey in particular, a lot of the experts spoke about how important open source is, but when you look at the survey respondents, you see in a statistically significant way, individuals understand open source as kind of a critical pathway for sovereign AI. And in that research report, we can post links to it later, but the research report shows the different aspects of open source that are so critical to sovereignty in this AI conversation. And I think the big piece that we talked about in our webinars and in the survey is the need for kind of control and independence from larger monopolies, and being able to not have that vendor lock-in that comes from using a proprietary system. And so for a country like Canada to be able to iterate on top of an open model, bring it in wherever it may need, not to use the word silo, but bring it in wherever it needs to be siloed and protected, to to engage with it in a way that we can have trust in it and transparency over what the weights are, what the training data might be, depending on which open solution you're using. But just that level of transparency and accountability, I think, makes a lot of sense when you're looking at a sovereign solution. I think enterprise is kind of a different boat. I mean, some enterprise solutions, some companies will want that transparency and accountability as well. I always think from my healthcare lens of that need for trust in the systems that are being used. But I think that particularly at a national level and that sovereignty piece, that's kind of how we get away from this feeling like we're not, this feeling that we might be beholden to a proprietary solution that could snap its fingers and do something different and take all of our data with it. So I think that piece is huge. And then the other piece that I've seen a lot of as I've been working on these other AI research reports that have been coming out, we've been working with Meta on the value of open source AI in different geographies. We just have one coming out on Latin America, so I can post that link as well. But the ability to take an open model and customize it and fine tune it to a specific instance. You can see examples. There's an example in Latin America called LATAM GPT. I don't know if you've heard of it, but they're training their models to work in Spanish and Portuguese and other indigenous languages. I think that we, at least for me as an English speaker and someone who's worked in English and has the privilege of having English as the global language, I don't often think about, how is this model benchmarking compared to in English, whereas I'm not as sure about how Spanish benchmarks or Portuguese benchmarks, but you think about some of the work we've done in Vietnam or in Indonesia and how those models are benchmarking in different languages. It's actually a flip of a coin on the accuracy. So I think that part is critical of can we have these groups that may not have the financial resources to build out their own foundational model, avoid them doing that and instead have them use these open models, fine tune them, make them really context specific, localized, even if it's, if it's a population wide sovereign model, or if it's something really small for a very specific use case, being able to use open source just from an economic and financial perspective makes so much more sense than building out a foundational model, which costs many, many, many dollars. So I think those are kind of the two buckets I think of when I think about open source and sovereign AI.
So by training AI with English data, we're kind of creating a digital divide somehow, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, practically speaking, the accuracy becomes, you can search this online, the accuracy becomes much worse when you start using a model in a language that's not English, or maybe not French. But I think also, when we look at, I think I'm personally a bit nervous about kind of how this system is creating haves and have-nots. And we all have heard about the bias going on in these models. We maybe witnessed it ourselves, and the for lack of a better word, the bad things going on. And so I think the open source, trust in the model, understanding how it's working, where the biases come in, what data was used to train it, can help in that way. And then being able to take the model and really localize it in a context where for example, a model that was built in North America by North American developers by a North American company won't have the different values, systems, and cultures of a country, maybe a country in Asia or Latin America. And so I think that that piece is really important to as I've said in some of my work and some of my presentations, to really democratize benefit outside of the group that these systems are being built for, or being built by, I should say.
And where do you see the role of the Linux Foundation ensuring that the democratization of that process and that data, and what do you see the Linux Foundation playing a role?
So I think the foundation does a really good job, as I mentioned, of providing that center of gravity for people to come to, even just to come to a summit, but to work within a neutral governance system that feels neutral, feels feels well controlled, feels like there's many different voices and parties coming together, that feels trusted. I'm really lucky to work for a foundation that is well trusted and liked in this space. And so I think that even just our history of being able to build out these open source projects that, for example, Kubernetes, donated by Google, but was donated to us, I think about 10 years ago, or a little over 10 years ago, and is now kind of the de facto container software in cloud computing, cloud native. And so I think that process of what we provide to technology projects clearly makes us an attractive hosting body for these projects.
Absolutely, yeah.
It brings in, we've done research, or I've cited research from, I think it was Harvard, on how when PyTorch was donated to the Linux Foundation a few years ago, the number of meta contributions fell, but the number of kind of competitor organizations, or NVIDIA, I can't remember who else, I think Uber, a bunch of different groups started actually contributing to, Uber was OpenSearch. Other competitors and other players generally in the space started contributing a lot more to that model. And I think anyone who knows how software or systems work knows that the more diverse perspectives and contributions we get to a project, the stronger it is. So I think that we have the history of knowing that our foundation and the neutrality of our governance structure and how we work really brings in different, and even just not even the foundation, but open source in general brings with it a lot of external collaboration and input that makes a project stronger. So I think that's a big piece for open source AI. I think it's a moving target right now, and we're trying to. I know that our group our AI and data group is trying to understand what our kind of next strategy is around that. And I think we've seen a lot of success with the PyTorch framework, with other tools, TensorFlow. And so I think that makes us, that gives us kind of the history, as I mentioned, of having these in place, or these tools and frameworks in place. But I think that. And then I think also, just to kind of toot my own horn for a minute, the research that we're doing is showing the value of open source, and having,
absolutely.
We of course are biased in that we produce research on open source, but our surveys and our interviews show that it is really the way forward for AI. And I think that having that evidence base that we're collecting, and that moving away from just an anecdotal, this is probably better than proprietary, to actually say, no, this is what the community wants and needs, and this is how people are developing and how people are building out infrastructure, I think becomes pretty critical when you're trying to convince a stakeholder, decision maker, policymaker, whoever it may be.
On that topic, I think you mentioned that open data is becoming as critical as open code in the age of AI, right? So just wonder if you could elaborate a little bit more on that topic.
Yeah. So I think I was speaking with my master supervisor a little while ago, and we were talking about the use of AI in healthcare and R&D and in pharmaceuticals and drugs. And um, we were talking a bit about are we putting the cart before the horse without having data sets available to train these models? And so I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that is the case. I don't know if I'm not really in that area of research. I don't know how successful these models have been in more recent history, but I think at least in looking from my healthcare perspective, the needle won't move very far unless we start to figure out the data component. And that is always that's not a new problem that we've encountered since AI. That's always, since generative AI, that's always been there and always been a problem. And so I think that as I wrote in a research report I published earlier this year, that kind of pathway to open data is quite critical if we're going to really move the needle in AI's benefits, at least if I'm thinking in the healthcare space. But that kind of triangulation of data becomes quite important for accurate models. So I mean, there are other, like, there's synthetic data, there's ways of going about building out a model that's really effective within a certain context. But I think if we're looking at larger healthcare foundational models, it's that data piece is really important. But wrapped up in data, open data is such a different problem or different area than open code or open software. It's open software becomes relatively straightforward if you're comparing it to open data. We have of course, the biggest thing I can think of is privacy concerns around data. The cleanliness of data, the manual labor that goes into cleaning data, making sure that doing a QA on a data set, and then making it available and then shareable, how we license data, how it goes from kind of proprietary to open or back again. So, and then for a lot of companies, data has kind of become their competitive advantage in the way that software and code might be less of a company's competitive advantage. So there are a lot of problems in that space that are quite hard to solve, but I do think it's something that should be, kind of within all these other conversations around progressing AI and making it accurate and beneficial and not harmful. That data piece is pretty critical.
Super cool. And in your master's degree work at UBC, you did some studies about the patient preferences regarding sharing personal health data, right? And I'm just wondering if you could tell us about the risk-benefit assessment that people go through when they are deciding to share the data.
Yes, my favorite topic. I loved my thesis. I could talk about this for hours. But so in my thesis, I studied, as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, I found this supervisor who was working in blockchain and public health, and we ended up having a lot of conversations around what was really interesting me around data sharing. And I came to realize that I was quite interested in behavioral economics and the heuristics our brain uses to make decisions. And so when you look at a decision environment like sharing health data, I wanted to understand, are people making a decision based off of a rational preference set, or are they really relying on quick and easy rules of thumb to make a decision around sharing their data? That, of course, came from many conversations of what rational preference sets actually mean, what heuristics are. But I just found this concept of, I would talk to people about sharing their data, and they would say things that felt like they were kind of grasping at something they couldn't quite understand or they were really worried about. But if you actually dug more into why someone was worried about it, they didn't really have a great answer to it, or they kind of got off topic. And anyway, so I found these conversations really interesting. And then within my master's thesis, we ran focus groups where we asked patients how they felt about sharing their data. And from kind of a qualitative assessment, I identified where it appeared that people were using these different heuristics. So the one that I can always think of is the availability bias, where someone makes a decision or a judgment call because it's the kind of the closest thing they can recall in their memory. So for example, if I say, would you want to share your health data with a drug company, they would say, oh God, no, Pfizer, or I don't know, like some X company just had some huge data breach. There was this big data breach even in an irrelevant industry like airspace, like aircraft. They'd get really hooked on these things they had heard about and just kind of assume. There are some people that just said, it just happens all the time. It's going to happen to my data. And maybe that is the case, but these people are making these decisions based off of not what the probability is of sharing their data, or of a cyber attack, but more just what they've heard in the news. So yeah, I found that piece really interesting, and you can't necessarily say it's not rational thinking, but I was really interested in how do we help a heuristic thought to make sure that it becomes kind of a more practical thought instead of just something that shuts down all data sharing or all kind of benefit. So there's, of course, a lot of people that wanted to share their data for social benefit, for what we called, what was it called? The altruism heuristic. I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, there was a lot of things going on. I just found that really fascinating, and I think that I definitely carry that kind of behavioral economics lens through to when I run interviews, and when I even when I read newspaper articles or I do my own research. What are these biases I'm using to judge and understand a situation?
It's really fascinating, the process that people go through, and some of the, like you said, the biases that people have as well when they deal with data, right?
Yeah.
And so we spoke about blockchain. We spoke about the Linux Foundation. We spoke about a little bit of AI as well. But how are you seeing? I know, I know you're doing a lot of research on AI and different topics as well. But how are you seeing the impact of AI everywhere today? Because generative AI, it's pretty much everywhere, right? So whenever you look at something online and or any website or any news or TV, people are talking about AI all the time. How do you see the evolution of AI and the impacts it's having on society in general?
So even just how it's impacting our group at our research group at the Linux Foundation, the number of AI projects we've taken on has exponentially spiked. And then within those research projects, I can kind of speak to what we've found in that research. So as I mentioned, we're doing some research with Meta on the economic impacts and social impacts of AI. And, across the board within these different geographies that we're looking at, AI promises really immense benefit, economically speaking, huge boost to GDP, productivity. We're also finding that it's not necessarily going to replace jobs. There are some jobs that will be replaced, but looking more kind of at an aggregate level, it will primarily complement jobs. I think we can kind of think of it in the way that the internet really complemented our jobs and made us at a point where we don't really have jobs without the internet in some domains. So I think that's another kind of piece that we were looking at from the workforce. And then I would say socially, it provides opportunities for us to, generative AI in particular, to kind of produce new output and new kind of creativity and knowledge that we wouldn't have had access to before. I think it really does bring not just, the internet kind of brought information to our fingertips. This is bringing content and something that may have taken us hours before, it takes us only a few minutes. So the productivity boost is as I'm sure anyone who's used it knows, is really remarkable. And I think with that, it comes with some considerations on how it could impact certain livelihoods, how it could impact maybe even our creative outlet, our creative expression. I think there are a lot of more kind of doomsday conversations beyond the robotics conversation, but there's kind of some. I know that I sometimes worry about our creativity, our ability to express ourselves, to read and write. But I think I'm just really interested to see how it how it changes the way we do things. And a lot of the work that I'm reading, or a lot of the research that I'm reading and the perspectives I'm seeing it's really interesting. It'll be really interesting to see kind of what new domains it opens up for us. If we think about how the internet allowed us to do things a lot faster, what kind of time did it free up for us to do other things, and how did it impact our day-to-day? So I think that kind of more at an individual level is something that I personally think about with this quite intense creeping up of generative AI and everything we do. I think from a software developer perspective, we are running some research on its impact for software developers. I know there are a lot of people that are quite concerned, especially at a junior level, what's going to happen to my job. And I would just say for I've had people come up to me and say, do I even need to study computer science? And I think that I don't know. I don't want to make any predictions, but I think human intelligence and human understanding of the way that the world works, the way that a certain domain like computer science works, will always be a critical facet of our interaction with AI, with generative AI. And I think that we will need to know how these systems function to be able to program them and to keep them non-biased, or as non-biased as possible, to keep them private and secure and safe and useful. And so I think there's always going to be a need for that human level intelligence that, that for example, a software developer will, that job role might change a lot. As we've seen, there's a lot more need for prompt engineering, for QAing, but particularly where we're at right now. But I think even in the future, we will need to be able to be that kind of conscious mind around how AI is interacting with our work and with our society, and kind of move it in the right direction. So I urge people to still do computer science degrees and not give up on that job area.
Absolutely. And Anna, I was wondering, because you mentioned that Linux Foundation is doing a lot of research, and there's the amount of research on AI it's increasing, just the amount of work you guys are doing. What's the criteria that you guys go through when deciding which topic to research? Is there a specific process you go through, or how does it work?
Yeah, good question. We have research that we run that we call core research, that we know that our foundation, our community really benefits from. So one of the best examples I have of that is we run our World of Open Source survey, which is really a kind of trend analysis across the world on open source priorities and different challenges that are happening that year. We've of course moved a bit more into AI in that survey, but really understanding, taking a pressure test, or I can't remember the expression, but we're trying to make sure we understand what different communities are doing and saying when it comes to open source AI, and how those different geographies may differ. And so that is always going to be kind of a mainstay of our portfolio. We have a few others that we do once a year. I think a lot of our initial conversations around which projects we're going to do will come in the form of Hillary or I, or my colleague Adrian, are at a conference and someone comes up to us and says, we just really need to know more about, for example, the CRA, and how people are feeling about the CRA, which is the Cyber Resilience Act, and how it will impact, the foundation, software developers, etc. And so we usually from there cobble together a group of collaborators and sponsors that also have this need or this research question they want answered. So it often just comes from our community. I think that's what I really like about our program is that we are really there to, to serve what the community needs to know. And then as a result, we are such a benefit to the people that are benefiting us by taking the surveys and paying for the research. We can then provide back this evidence. So I would say it's primarily, to answer your question, primarily through our community. We get approached with research topic ideas, and we're really lucky that we've been able to have people consistently approach us and want to work with us. And we're always looking for more sponsors and more partners on our research, but we've been really lucky so far.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And Anna, I was hoping you could share with us how did you get to the Linux Foundation? Did they look for you, or did you apply for a job, or how was your process to join the Linux Foundation?
Yeah, I'm kind of embarrassed to say, because I always feel bad when someone says that they how easily they got a job, but I did get this. Unfortunately, I got this job quite easily. Well, I guess, okay, I'll explain. When I worked for the Blockchain Research Institute in Toronto, I worked with my now boss, Hillary Carter, and I got that job just through cold interview, email, whatever it was. And we worked together for just over a year. And we kind of formed a very nice working relationship. And I think I stepped in at a time where she just really needed basically a warm body to do a bunch of work. And I got to do a lot of different stuff, and it was a great opportunity. And then went off to do my master's. And then right when I was looking for work and kind of thinking about my next steps after the 2 years were up and I was writing my thesis or finishing my thesis, Hillary reached out and said, "We'd come work for me again." So I sat down on a Zoom call with her, and she basically pitched the job to me and said, "Do you want it?" So I took it. But I will say a lot of the jobs I've gotten through persistence, cold calls, emails, LinkedIn. So it's a combination of who you know, but also just really kind of showing up, writing a good cover letter, emailing someone after an interview. I don't know, for those of you that will listen to this that are looking for a job. Yeah, I'm sorry, my story isn't maybe more inspiring, but I will say the work I did with Hillary at the Blockchain Research Institute clearly paid off. She liked working with me and offered me this job a few years later. So.
And persistency, like you said too, right? So knowing people, networking, persistency, and being prepared for the work as well. So
yeah, maintaining a relationship that you never know where it goes, but yeah, maintaining those relationships is really important.
Yeah, it's super important. Networking is key for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And and talk about career and look into everything you have done here. If you could go back to the beginning of your career, back even before you chose your university path, would you have done anything different than what you have done?
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure I have a better answer than no, but I think it would have been nice to have been able to picture kind of where I could have ended up. But I've always thought of myself as someone who has a job that is hard to explain and didn't exist when they were, 5 years before they were in it. So I think I wish I had not been so hard on myself to really find a focus. Oh, actually, one thing that I got really good advice from someone. So I was never totally sure, what specific realm I was interested in. My sister was really into philosophy. My mom knew from grade 12 that she wanted to be a cartographer. But I just kind of I took this very interdisciplinary undergrad, international relations, at least at UBC is 3 different disciplines. I took this computer science. I tried this computer science minor. I took, as I mentioned, all these other courses in arts, and I took language courses. And looking back, I can see that was me just kind of really honing in my interest in understanding at a systems level, kind of how politics and economics and society works, and that kind of larger picture of how these systems work. But one piece of advice I got too late, but I do it sometimes still, is if someone's saying something in a class or, in a meeting or something, and it just really interests you, just star around where after you take the note. I mean, I always took my notes by hand, but star or bold the note that really interests you, and then see if there's kind of a pattern throughout that. And I mean, I think with finding I was really lucky in my master's where I had this supervisor that really let me just kind of intellectually play and ask him stupid questions and understand, really dive into this question I had about kind of how behavioral economics and heuristics works and decision-making works. And so finding those kind of ecosystems and those people that allow you to play and explore, I think is critical. So to answer your question, I don't know that I would have changed anything besides starring more of my notes and not being so hard on myself for the journey, because I just really wanted to figure out my focus. And I mean, hindsight's 2020, but my focus was really broad, ended up being very broad. So yeah.
That's fantastic. It's always interesting when I ask this question to people, because I can see they stop and they go back and they go. It's always interesting to see people's reaction to that question.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned to you, one of the things we have been doing is trying to help young adults in Brazil that want to get into technology, right? And there's lots of questions, like you mentioned. You're hearing some of those questions. People are wondering if they should go into tech or not. What's going to happen with AI? And I'm just wondering, what kind of advice would you give to someone maybe from a non-technical background who wants to build a career in technology, or maybe even blockchain or AI or any other field that you think would be interesting to work on? What kind of recommendations would you have for those people?
Yeah, I mean, I think the comment I just made about starring things that interest you is good. I think there's so much online. There's so much noise. There's so many things I think, it's really easy to have especially right now, other, things drowning each other out. If you don't have to go into AI if you want to be in tech. It probably feels like that right now, but I would say, I really I struggled at the start of my career of feeling like I could talk the talk, but I couldn't walk the walk. And I actually had a supervisor say that to me in my first tech job at the web development bootcamp. She said, "You just need to know how to talk the talk. Like, if you need," I mean, she had urged me to take these courses, but she really made me understand that there's a difference between, being able to talk about something versus actually know something. And so I think that actually in a kind of feedback loop that helped me I really wanted to know how blockchain worked, for example. And I read more about AI, and I realized there's just this depth of technical detail and things that I just don't know about AI, and I don't have the background to know. And so I think I would say explore that and dig into that to a point where you're still kind of curious and you're not feeling overwhelmed, but also know that your skill set, like I was saying earlier, my own skill set or a non-technical person's skill set is really valuable for looking at that bigger picture of how these technologies interplay with other systems, and how to build systems that are less biased and more fair and democratic. And I think that's really, we're at a point right now, historically speaking, that we really need to be looking at building out these fair and safe systems. So I think that for those that are non-technical, your skill set is just as critical as a software developer or as someone else when we're looking at building out these systems. And I also, because I'm non-technical, I get to wield that skill set, for example, in presentations and in other settings where I'm kind of face to face with clients. And that is really my, beyond the research skills that I like to use, within this community I'm in, that's really my strong suit, is being able to kind of present and share and disseminate knowledge. And so I think finding your soft skills that you're really good at and understanding that the technical stuff is actually not as important for you to know because that's not what you've chosen to study. So yeah, I mean, imposter syndrome is always going to be there. I have it all the time. I had it with you on an email a few months ago, but yeah, I don't know, just try to not have it, because everyone's skill set is just so critical for us to build these
Absolutely.
fair systems. Yeah.
And it's one thing also, if you allow me to mention, I was going to say in the previous question, when you, I have been on IT for almost 40 years. And when I started my career, a lot of the jobs that exist today, they did not exist, and we had no idea they're going to exist in the future, right? So it's pretty hard to predict the future. And it's interesting to see so many things are happening right now, but it's also pretty hard to predict what's coming. And like you said, I think it's also important, the willingness to try and the willingness to learn, right? So because that's what pushes people forward. And like you said, don't be afraid of trying things, and it doesn't matter how technical or non-technical you are. So there's always opportunities for people that want to make a difference somehow.
Yeah,
which is pretty important. And so we spoke a lot about work and career and everything else, but I'm just wondering, what do you like to do when you're not conducting research or managing projects? What do you do for fun?
So my hobbies, I suppose, I have gotten into road cycling. I've turned 30. I live in Vancouver. You kind of have to road cycle. I have just a crappy, well, I love it, but it's a gravel bike and I have road tires on it, and it's been really fun to get out of my head. As a researcher, I have a lot of thoughts. And so it's been nice to have that kind of activity. And then my other love outside of my work is sewing. It's a bit nerdy, but I love sewing. And I think there's so much complexity in what I'm doing, which I love and I'm grateful for, that I have this complex, interesting job. But I get to turn to a sewing pattern and just follow instructions really, really clearly is kind of a nice brain break. But I do love that kind of focus on a sewing project. So that's kind of my nerdy hobby.
It's fantastic. And is there a book or movie or podcast or any other activity that you like and that you'd like to share with the community at all?
Yeah. So I haven't listened to them recently, but I was listening to the Pivot podcast quite a bit. I think getting back to how, I don't know if you're familiar, but they speak kind of about what's going on in the tech sector, but they look at it from more kind of a political perspective. So I get to, when I'm feeling productive, I put it on and I get to kind of, learn more about what's happening in the sector I'm in, but then hear from it from I don't know how technical the two hosts are, Scott Galloway and Karis Fisher, but they sound technical, but they also bring that kind of political, social perspective to it, economic perspective. I'm reading a book about the female anatomy and biology and how we have evolved to have these different parts of our body and how we've evolved to be mothers and caretakers. And so that's been a good book. But yeah, I would think those are kind of more educational things. I just got back from Korea and I read The Island of Sea Women while I was there, which was a really great book about the deep sea divers who are, they hold their breath, they don't have oxygen tanks. And so that was a great book. So nonfiction or fictional book.
How was Korea?
Fantastic. Yeah, it was a major career highlight. I met Linus Torvalds, which was huge.
Wow. Wow.
And Dirk Handel, his companion at these summits. And it went really well. I had a work conference and then I got to spend a week gallivanting in a new country. So the perks of my job are these awesome trips where I get to share more about our research, meet great people, and be in different cities.
What about the food?
The food was really good. I don't eat a lot of Korean food, but I'm changing that. It was very spicy, but not, I was warned and it was okay for me. I can't handle a ton of spice, but I really enjoyed the food, and the language barrier was hard at times. But they have a lot of apps that make food ordering a lot easier. So yeah.
Fantastic. So we have been talking for close to 1 hour here, and I think we covered a lot. But I feel we could speak here for another 2 hours minimum. But is there a question that I did not ask that you wish I had asked?
I don't know. I mean, I think I really loved all the questions. Like you've done your homework on what I've done and the work that I've been involved in, which was really nice. And I love talking about as I mentioned, my master's thesis.
Mm-hmm.
I was gonna say you didn't ask me if I've met Linus Torvalds, but I already gave that away. So, but I think I don't know. I think maybe just another topic we haven't discussed is the kind of remote nature of my work and how that impacts my work. And I think it, as I mentioned, it gives me a lot of flexibility. I get to travel and do all these interesting things. But I do miss that, open source is such a collaborative activity and process. And so sometimes it's hard to be working remotely, as maybe from I don't know if you work remotely, but it can be a bit trying at times. So it's really nice to have opportunities like this. And when I met you at the Vancouver Linux users group to kind of meet people and meet my community. And yeah, that's been a big adjustment for me working remotely, but kind of getting the silver linings where I can.
How long have you been working remote?
So I worked, I guess in this role has been 3 years, just over 3 years. Before it was kind of remote, kind of not in my master's, because I did my master's in COVID. So the coursework part was remote, but yeah, I mean, we all know what it feels like to work remotely. So
yeah, I've been working remote for almost 6 years now.
Oh wow.
It took a little while to get used to, but once you get used to the benefits of waking up and having breakfast and coming to your computer to do the work, and also at the end of the day, you don't have to rush to take a train if it's raining or snowing, right? So there's lots of benefits. I can go for a walk around lunchtime in the neighborhood where I live, and there's many benefits. But at the same time, I miss some of the human contact, but the team that I work for today, most of them they live abroad. They're not even in Canada, so which is really fascinating. You deal with many. I have team members in Japan, India, Brazil, the US, Canada, Finland. It's very, very fascinating to be in that kind of a work environment. But if I had that place where I could go once a week to see people, I would enjoy doing that as well. Yeah. I feel there's a need for human interaction as well, face to face. But it's fun. It's a lot of fun. Yeah. And Before we go, is there anything else you'd like to share? A LinkedIn page or website, Linux Foundation? I think everybody probably knows the Linux Foundation website. Actually, I have one more question. How was it to say hi to Linus and talk to him a little bit?
Well, it was very brief. He and Dirk gave a keynote, and then I went on stage after them. So I keynoted right after them. So I got to meet them kind of as we were waiting for their keynote to start, and they sat down right next to me. He's quite I think he would call himself a bit shy. I don't know if he would, but he just kind of sat and waited his turn very politely. But I was sitting there and I was like, I shouldn't bug him, but I just thought I got to do it. So I looked over and I put my hand out and said, hi, I'm Anna. I work for the Linux Foundation. Nice to meet you. And they were both very, very nice and polite. And then they gave this awesome keynote about actually quite a bit about the impacts of AI on software developers and kind of what Linus is seeing in that space. And yeah, it was great. Everyone was so excited to have him on stage. He's such a celebrity in our community. So yeah.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Yeah. And anything you'd like to mention in terms of a personal page or website or anything else?
Yeah, so I think I've mentioned a few of our research reports in this call, or in this podcast. So if you go to the Linux Foundation website, if you go into the hamburger menu, you'll see a click to our research page, and you can filter through that page or just look for the research that might be interesting to you. There's a Sovereign AI report is there, all of the research we've done with Meta recently, some of which will be public. The Latin American AI report will be published, I think next week. We have it set to be published. So anyway, things are there. Lots more will be added there constantly. I'm on LinkedIn. If any of your listeners want to connect with me, reach out. They have any follow-up questions from what I've said, what it's like to work for the foundation, happy to answer those questions. Yeah, I would say those are the two digital areas for follow-up.
Fantastic. And we need to get the foundation to take you to Brazil so you can do some work over there and some research over there.
I would love that. Yeah, maybe some anonymous emails from you and your listeners. You need a research presence in Brazil.
That's a good plan. We'll put that into execution.
Okay.
So thank you so much again for taking time to speak with me. And it's almost 7:30 p.m. here in Vancouver. It's been a pleasure, and just stay with me for a couple minutes.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let me stop recording.